John Wick Chapter 4 is the most ambitious film in the series. There's massive set pieces in multiple major cities, an upgraded visual style, and a downright unrelenting final hour to what might just be the last mainline entry in the saga. Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
Man has to look his best when he gets married. Or buried.
Very good. This is a movie podcast. We work through franchises and subgenres of movies. Of course, we are capping off John Wick season with the new release, John Wick Chapter 4.
Woo!
Yep. Is this the first new release we've done? Is this the first?
This is.
Yeah, yep. This is the first time we've actually went to the movies to go see something and come and talk about it on the Collector's Cut. So, exciting times. So we'll start spoiler free, of course, as we always do. Of course, it is a sequel, so you can expect there might still be spoilers for the previous movies that'll come up in the first section. Yep. But we'll warn you before you get into any spoilers for part 4. And yeah, we'll get into it. So, John Wick Chapter 3 basically ended with John hurt, betrayed, and determined to take down the table, aligning himself with the Bowery King, played by Laurence Fishburne, and that's kind of where we left off with part 3, and we're here with part 4. So we'll get into it. I mean, honestly, I feel like usually I'll do a little plot summary, but it's kind of weird sometimes with sequels because it's like, well, it's continuing from where the last one left off. I feel weird even giving you much of a description.
I will say, though, without giving too much away, this movie, I felt for the first 15 minutes, they were just dealing with the fact of we don't like where we left the cliffhanger off last movie, and we're just going to completely change it up.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. We'll get into it, but we'll go through the details later. I think we'll just start off with talking about our general feelings and whatnot. We'll talk about this more later because a lot of this will pertain to just sort of how this movie concludes and where this franchise is going next. But I will just point out here at the start that for a while we've been saying that 4 and 5 were coming, and 5 was a confirmed thing. 4 and 5 were talked about. There's a reason why I had that in my head, but at some point along the way they combined 4 and 5 into just 4. So I'm putting that out there because I realized that we said that a lot, but we'd already recorded all the reviews before anyone had seen them and corrected us in the comments. So but obviously Ballerina is a thing, though. The spin-off Ballerina is a thing. There might be more spin-offs based on this movie, to be honest.
Boy howdy, this movie was like, hey, we have an entire ensemble, and we have the potential to spin any of them off.
We may end up with a whole shared Wick universe, baby.
I want there to be, if they end up doing that, I want just one of those spin-off movies to eventually say the global population has gone down to 7 billion because so many people have died.
7? That's optimistic. 5 billion more like by the time they're all done. So, yeah. So, we'll just, David, what did you think? What's your general feeling on John Wick Chapter 4?
General feeling. I think that this movie does a solid job of continuing the franchise. I think that it is, in a lot of places, more stylistic than anything that's come before it. They take a lot of chances on some big visual imagery, but there are also points where it's just, we're just going to do crazy things. Just insane things that... I think that over the last 3 reviews, what we said the most is these movies keep on adapting to different environments. And that's no different in this movie, but this one I think also mixes it up in that a lot of the new interesting stuff comes from creative weaponry as well. They're introducing a lot of new weapons. So overall, just keep it flat. I do think that this is probably not the best Wick movie. I would still probably give that to part 2, but I think that it is probably, I'd say, better than the original and definitely better than 3.
Okay. I think I probably end up with it in the same place, in that I'd say it's probably definitely better than 3, maybe better than 1, but I'd still say 2 is better. And I think 2 is better paced. This movie widely documented before. Everyone knew before going to see it. It was 2 hours and 40 something minutes or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And you do feel it at points. So it is a long movie. And it is interesting that the biggest thing I hated about 3, they tried to just kind of like get rid of like right at the start of the movie as quickly as humanly possible. Let's just deal with it. We'll get into other things.
This movie, I felt like there were 2 or 3 things that we really didn't like in 3, and not only did this movie immediately erase them, but then also redid them better.
Yeah, I like the movie quite a bit. I will say though, it's not without faults. There are some things that I didn't like. There's 1 or 2 characters that I didn't like, but
okay.
By and large, I liked what it was doing. I liked the big climax. I liked most of the set pieces quite a bit. 2 or 3 of them in particular really stand out as maybe being the best set pieces of the entire franchise up until this point. I agree that almost instantly it felt like I don't know, maybe the director's leveled up or something, but he wanted to do more cinematic looking things, a lot more like shots against sunsets and sunrises and just really kind of moody stuff that almost like it's kind of like a slight negative in the sense that it feels like it's almost not in the same world as the first movie at this point because it just looks so visually different. But can't deny it looked pretty a lot of the time and is visually quite appealing and whatnot. So that's good. Even the music as well, I felt like they did a lot of things where they brought back the John Wick theme and it was sprinkled throughout, but they would do like different versions of it. There's one that's like very Western inspired. There's one that's more samurai inspired. So there's a lot of that stuff going on as well. So it felt like there was a lot of creative flexing of muscles in this.
Yeah, I think that this movie is probably the biggest send up to sort of like the 60s, 70s era of action films, because there is a whole feeling of Western in it. There's this whole feeling of like samurai and ninja stuff. And then not to spoil too much into it, but the entire, I would say, final set piece pretty much is just the Warriors. Just straight up exactly the Warriors.
I've seen the Warriors. I don't remember it well enough to even know.
That's fair. It was
this comparison is, but yeah.
The thing from the Warriors was the trying to make their way from point A to point B, and there's literally the exact same thing of the radio operator is calling out the location of the group the entire time.
Okay, yeah, I don't remember that, but yeah, it's a gauntlet, effectively. There's a gauntlet to go through, which is not surprising. And to be honest, that's when I enjoy John Wick at its most, is when it's at its simplest, and it's, sometimes it gets a bit too mired in its mythology, and I get a little bogged down in some of the because at this point, you're 4 movies deep, you've added so much onto your mythology and the rules and things, but when it's simple, when it's like John has to get from point A to point B, and they're going to try and stop him, and he just has to go through it, and it leads to a variety of locations and a variety of like difficult challenges for him to face with lots of killing and murder, then that's when it's at its most effective. So unsurprisingly, the last like 40 minutes of this movie are the best 40 minutes of the movie, I would say.
Oh yeah.
And it's not even a question in my mind that they're the best 40 minutes or so.
I mean, I got out of the theater and I just wanted to write down my notes on like, okay, what are the basic plot beats? I got pretty tripped up in the middle in terms of, okay, which of these happened first, which of these was whatever. But then as soon as it hit that last extended set piece, it was like, nope, I know exactly the order of events here, because it was so vividly well done, and the whole way through it just followed a natural progression.
Yeah, so no, really good. Like I said, there is 1 or 2 characters that I don't like too much, and one character that I do think's a bit over the top is the main villain. I'm not so sure I like Bill Skarsgård's performance as the villain. He's doing this really over the top French accent, and he's very eccentric. He's very cartoony in a lot of ways. There's another villain character that I hated. I hated the entire time he was on screen.
Who was that?
Killer.
Oh yeah,
right?
That's fair.
Despise that character. So those are probably my biggest problems. And then I've got one kind of like overall story critique that we'll get into more in spoilers, but I'll just say what the start of the movie sort of, and even the end of the last movie, is kind of saying the movie's going to be about. They kind of just sort of transition away from it, and it's not really about that anymore.
Yeah.
Especially when you get towards the end, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is how they're going to wrap up all this story, but this isn't really doing anything in the realm of what was teased either at the end of the last movie or even the start of this one, where it was very much clear that there was kind of a call to action a couple of times early on in this movie of like, you got to go do this thing. And then at some point along the way, it just became not about that, and it became about other things. So there is a slight sort of switcheroo in like the main like goal of the movie. So
I honestly think that a big problem that this movie runs into in terms of its actual beats, its story pacing, is that it is actually trying to set up a larger spin-off, I feel. Yes, we know Ballerina's a thing, but as we said, it feels like any of these characters can be spun off into their own separate thing.
Yeah.
And there's probably, I would say, 4 or 5 plot threads from early in the movie that are essentially dropped because they're like, well, if you want to see it continued, this character will be in theaters in 2026.
Yeah, there was one other character that felt fairly tacked on to me. And
I think I know which one.
I have a bit of a bias against this one, actually, just because the actor playing the character is someone who I already didn't like in something else. So as soon as I saw him, I kind of had a bit of a, him. Yeah. So the actor I'm talking about, or the character I'm talking about, is Nobody, right? Which I thought was a weird name to use because there was a knockoff of John Wick starring Bob Odenkirk called Nobody that came out like last year or 2 years ago. Yeah. And I thought it was weird to use. Maybe they didn't know when they wrote it, but it felt like weird.
Nah, that would have been pre-pandemic, wouldn't it have been? I thought Nobody came out a while ago.
Yeah, maybe it may have been a while ago. I know time's weird in the last couple of years. It's all sort of
it was
blending
2021.
Together. Yeah,
so it wasn't pre-pandemic, but definitely pre-production, I think.
That's fair. But anyway, so the actor, he was in a show called Winona Earp, which is based on a comic book, an IDW comic book. And it's like the great granddaughter in present day of Wyatt Earp fighting like monsters and shit. Fun idea for a story, fun idea for a show. His character, and it's not necessarily the actor's fault, but the character was just so goddamn like it was like a charisma vacuum. Everyone else wasn't necessarily the best actor in the world, but they all seemed to be having fun with their roles, and he just felt like he was just this miserable prick in the middle of all of it. Yeah, not that he's bad in this per se, but I feel like his character though, you could probably just remove his entire character from the story, and it really wouldn't affect anything.
See, this is where I'm actually surprised that you didn't like this character, because while yes, I don't think they are really that critical to the story, I felt that this is the closest we got over all 4 movies to that anti-John Wick that you were looking for. The one who's similar in all these ways and yet is still different in all the other ways.
Yeah, well, I was looking for that in a villain, and I think this movie did give me that, but I don't think it gave me a villain. It gave me in a sympathetic character. It gave me in Kane, who is an equal to John Wick, and is a much more interesting character. I think Donnie Yen is really good in the movie, and they do some neat things with him. Do I really believe that someone who's blind could be this effective in this type of combat? I'm not so sure I do, but that's okay. It's a movie. I can roll with it, right? That's the fun.
If we're just going to talk about this character at this part, they named the blind character Kane.
Yes. Well, I assumed that was like an intentional like alias.
I'm sure in some regard, yes, but it as soon as they said that the blind guy walking around with the cane is named Kane, I'm like, okay, sure, why not?
Yeah. No, I thought he was good. He added.
No, he was great.
It was an interesting layer because he's not actually a villain. He's just kind of like forced into being the antagonist to John Wick because the table have got power and they've got things over him, and that's So that was an interesting thing. It was like, okay, you've given me his equal, but he's not an equal who's someone I hate. He's an equal who I actually kind of feel bad for and want to sympathize with, and that was an interesting dynamic.
He also was the only constant source of comedy beats throughout this movie. He wasn't a comedic character, but he was so laughable in his actions.
Yeah, he's got a couple of sort of witty moments. There's a moment towards the end that actually got the biggest laugh of the whole movie in my theater, which isn't really a comedy line per se, but it's satisfying to hear. Obviously we won't spoil it until we get into things, but
yeah.
So yeah. Yeah, and I think, as far as setting up the larger world goes, you could say, okay, Kane feels like something that could be set up for the future. Nobody feels like someone who's set up for the future. You've got the sort of the Japanese daughter who feels like she could be in her own movie at some point.
If the Japanese daughter was not approached by producers during filming and told, hey, sign this contract for 3 more films just in case, I would be shocked.
Well, she's like a pop star or something, I think. The actress.
Oh, that's fine, but yeah. I guarantee you, with how this movie played her throughout, she is already locked in if they so choose.
And not even like a character that you'd follow per se, but I think even the casting of Clancy Brown, who's in this, is someone who represents like the interests of the table.
Yeah,
I feel like you cast Clancy Brown because you're hoping to use him again in other movies set in the same universe. He can be this figure that pops in. He can be, not be your literal Nick Fury, but he can be your Samuel L. Jackson guy who kind of pops in and out.
Yeah, I think it might have been the thing where they were hoping that Ian McShane would take that role, where it's like, oh, everything takes place around the Continental, and therefore Ian McShane's just kind of around. But then I don't think that they thought Ian McShane would be able to do that. Maybe he'd be busy with other things. But Clancy Brown's the kind of guy like, no, he'll make time to just show up, be around.
Hey, Clancy Brown likes a paycheck, all right? He's
He's fantastic. Fine. And I adored his character in this movie. I will say that over the past, I think it's 2-3 movies now, last movie we had the adjudicator and we had the elder and all that stuff, and it's like, all right, we're throwing out too many capital letter roles here of the blanks. This movie, they introduced Clancy Brown's character of the Harbinger within the first, I gotta say, at least 5 minutes.
Oh yeah, it was right near the start, yeah.
And I immediately rolled my eyes. I'm like, here we go, more the roles. But as soon as he actually came out and did his bit, I enjoyed him immensely.
Yeah, I was happy the adjudicator wasn't like a thing again.
It's weird because the Harbinger is pretty much the exact same thing that adjudicator was. Yeah. I guess they just listened to the audience response and it's like, yeah, we don't particularly want that.
Yeah, I mean, he was more interesting. I don't want to say why, because obviously spoiler details, but there was some interesting details that make him just have a little bit more layers, I think. So yeah, I mean, obviously we have mostly a great cast. There's 1 or 2 roles that I feel a little bit iffy about, but for the most part, I was having fun with the actors. And like I say, cinematography is pretty great, music's great. Particularly, all of this all comes together, and all my favorite set pieces in the last 45 minutes or so. Excellent stuff. And of course, this isn't necessarily the last John Wick either. Like just like yesterday, or the day before, Lionsgate and the director of talks. Yeah, it's not necessary. We might do John Wick 5. That might be a thing that happens. Because we're not going to say never, and we're not. There's ways to go.
Are you asking us to turn down money? I don't understand. What?
So, while 5's not this done deal like I was saying a few episodes ago, at least it's still very much on the table. And we'll talk about where they could go with 5, obviously, once we've done the spoilers and talked about where this goes. So
now, I guess, let me ask you this. Do you feel that this movie was obviously 2 movies stitched together, or do you think it all flowed as one movie on its own?
I mean, I kind of agree that the first little chunk feels a bit separate. I think, and maybe that shift in what the focus of the movie is also kind of a symptom of like it changing from 2 movies to 1. Because when I was thinking about it as I was watching it, knowing this in my head, is I was sort of thinking, okay, I could sort of see maybe like why you'd want to have 2 movies where you introduce Kane in 1 movie and you have him build up, and then so it's not just 1 movie with him. You get like 2 movies to actually really flesh him out.
Right.
It may be similar with some of the other characters, but I can maybe see there's some symptoms of just where it does feel like it shifts focus, where maybe some ideas for what the ending truly represents would have been set up better if they had time to do it in 2 movies. That said, though, like they made this choice for a reason, and perhaps it was ultimately the right choice. Maybe it was just a slightly another go around to the script just to tighten up maybe the transition to 1 movie, particularly in the first half of the movie to the middle sort of section.
If I had to posit on my side, I think, and we'll get into spoilers as to why later, but I think that the 4th movie originally, as we speculated in third movie stuff was more heavily focused on Bowery King and being able to do that, and probably set in Japan for a lot of it. And I think that the primary antagonist was actually going to be the tracker character, Nobody.
Okay, yeah.
And maybe we get hints of Kane and whatnot just to build him up, but I don't think that would have been a thing until the fifth movie.
Do you think Nobody would have been back for the fifth movie as well, though, still?
I mean, it depends on where the character arc goes. If he was an antagonist, I mean, how many antagonists have survived a John Wick movie?
True. I've got other thoughts, but I don't want to say them till spoils. Yeah. So are you thinking, because obviously the Japan stuff is largely the big first act set piece.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you're thinking that originally that would have, not necessarily that exact set piece, but like the final set piece of the original fourth movie would have been the big showdown in Japan, effectively.
I would say so. I think that, I mean, again, it's hard to explain without getting too much into spoilers, but the buildup of the Marquis as a necessary force against John Wick, because the Marquis only exists by the table saying, all right, we're just going to put emergency powers into Palpatine here.
And the Marquis, just to explain this for people, is the villain of the movie. That's Bill Skarsgård's character. And I will say, like on that subject, I do feel like his introduction is a little hasty. Like, not so much the way it's filmed. The way it's filmed is very much typical villain. Like, you know, Ian McShane goes up in the elevator and he's back to him. He's looking out the window at the skyline, and it's the very cinematic. Like the actual build up in the scenes is all very natural and smooth. But in terms of like who exactly Marquis is and why he's in this position, it did feel kind of abrupt, and it did feel like they had to kind of explain some of it in retrospect as the movie went on, just to sort of like solidify who it was. Because I actually didn't get that Marquis was even like someone's name at first. I thought Marquis was another role, like Harbinger.
I think it is, because it's, you know, there's the Marquis de whatevers. Those are, I think it's a role. I'm pretty sure you are assigned the role of Marquis, and he just happened to be the Marquis of whatever.
Okay.
It's much in the same way that the character who went by Nobody is credited here as Tracker. That's not his name, but...
In fact, actually, on the subject of, like, you saying, oh, we didn't like the cliffhanger endings we left in 3, so we're going to tidy them up as quickly as possible. There was one element of that did kind of bug me, which we'll talk about in spoilers, but there was one that I just kind of felt like they really brushed over, as if it never really happened, and it just kind of felt like, we kind of either we regret making that choice when we wrote the third movie, or whatever. But but
if I had to guess, I would say back when it was 2 movies, I think that without saying too much about it, the first big scene with Winston and Sharon, I think that would have ended the fourth movie.
You think that'd have been near the end? Yeah, I can see that. It's interesting. It is interesting to think that they basically decided that all the story they set up in 3 isn't necessarily something they wanted to do. They just wanted to go straight to what the fifth movie effectively was planned to be at that point. And I think at this point we can stop talking about the theoretical fourth and fifth movies, and just because now this is the 4 we have, this is the one that get made, and someday there might be an actual fifth that, you know, does something else, and we can go into it. But it was interesting to think about on this first viewing of, like, this was originally going to be maybe 2 movies, and I don't even know how far they got. Like, I don't know if it was just like, oh, there was a couple of scripts for 4 and 5, and then it changed to just 1. Like, I don't know if they got even to pre-production before.
I don't know.
They merged them. So, like, you know, it's hard to say these things. It is interesting to think about, though. So, yeah, I guess we'll give the spoiler warning, because we have a lot to talk about. We have a lot to get into. So, full spoilers for John Wick Chapter 4. You have been warned.
John kills people.
He kills a lot of people. Actually, one of the things, you know, we kind of... I talked about this before. In fact, I think I might have even talked about it on not a John Wick episode. So, we've already recorded a lot of our episodes for next month, which is our video game season. So I want to bring this point back up because we're actually talking about John Wick right now, and it's relevant.
Time continuum.
Yeah. So one of the things that I thought about in John Wick 3 that I didn't really mention on the review, I don't think, but I mentioned it more in depth on one of the video game movies that we do next month, is that bizarrely John Wick particularly the third one, it started to really feel like the best movie version of what it feels like to play a video game. It's not an adaptation of a video game, but the reason why I said that is because towards the end of the third movie, they introduced those armored guys that came into the Continental, and I just it felt like, oh, you've got all your regular enemies, and then you make a big deal about introducing the new type of tougher enemy. But in a video game, what would happen after that is that you'd start to just see those tougher versions mixed in with the regular enemies. And sure enough, in John Wick 4, there's a bunch of armored enemies mixed in with the regular dudes.
Yep.
It felt very video gamey. In fact, there's even a scene, we won't talk about it now, but there's a scene that people on the internet are calling the Hotline Miami scene, which is very video gamey, right?
Oh, straight up.
So there's a lot of video game feelings in John Wick, and I feel like that's never been truer than Chapter 4. Like, when those action scenes start, in fact, if I'm going to level a little critique at it, is that the fight in Japan in the sort of just the big fancy room with all the sort of light fixtures, like I think that goes on almost too long. There's a certain point where I'm like, how many people are going to run into for him to kill? Like, it just keeps being groups of two.
And that's the thing that I mean, you say we'll get to it, and that's fair, but that was the only scene in the movie where, because again, they keep on coming in groups of two. By the time it hit like the fourth time, I was like, okay, this scene has to end soon. You're not doing enough with it.
Eventually, Kane came in, and once Kane came in, it was good again, because it was like, now this is going to actually showdown. But
once Kane came in, you recognize this is the final wait. This is the boss.
But it's like, because, like I say, the last like 45 minutes are all non-stop, set piece. But it's moving through different set pieces, and they're all doing different things. This was like a lot of repetition.
It was all in the same room. It reminded me, I think it was the second movie where they had to move through that art museum.
Yes.
And every single setting was just beautiful looking, but they kept moving. They kept going through different parts of the museum. This one, it was a bunch of lit up cubes, and we just stayed in that room for, I think it was at least 20 minutes.
It felt like it, anyway. It felt like it if it wasn't.
Yeah.
So, actually, one thing we do have to talk about here, we recorded the first 3 episodes like a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
Like a good month or so ago, we recorded the first 3 episodes. So, we didn't mention Lance Reddick passing away in the last episode, because he I think he passed away like the day or day after we put our second.
I think it was 1 week before release, so it would have been like just before we put out our second one.
Yeah. So obviously we couldn't mention it because we didn't know the future. So this is the first time we get a chance to talk about the fact that Lance Reddick shockingly passed away very suddenly. Which it did kind of hurt because I didn't see The Wire first. Obviously, he's well known for The Wire. I saw him in Lost and then Fringe. I'm a big Fringe fan, so I know him from that. But then, of course, I did go back and watch The Wire, and then he's popped up, and he's always a friendly face. But whenever he pops up in something, it's always nice to see him. He was a staple of this franchise, and it is funny that before I went to see it, I was thinking, oh, I wonder if there's going to be a 5th one, how do they deal with the fact that they can't have him back? But little did I know that Sharon was going to be killed off at the start of the movie.
Right?
Yeah. So, which, like, honestly, obviously they made this choice anyway. This was the choice they wanted to make, so it's fine. Like, there's nothing weird about it, but it did feel a little like weird, like them talking about losing this great man, and they're talking about him dying, and he's like, it's been an honor, sir. And I'm like, they did just really die. This feels weird. Like I'm feeling things.
It struck me in the same way of I went to go see The Last Jedi in theaters, which that was a mistake on my part. But there's that scene where Carrie Fisher is, sucked out through the airlock or whatever, and she had just recently died right before I went to go see this. And I was like, oh my God, are they actually going to kill her off here? And then she does the weird force thing, comes back into the ship, and she's still alive until the next movie. And I think this is the perfect counterexample to that, where they just killed off this character entirely by surprise. It was not foreshadowed at all. And somehow it just managed to have the universe line up of like, well, I guess God likes continuity.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the last of the concerns after he passed away really was like, oh, what are they going to do about the next John Wick movie? That is not important at all. But it just so happens that the character dying, so them talking about him and grieving for him in the movie just like hit really hard because he really did just die. So,
it is one of those things where I know that you have to go through like MPAA ratings and stuff like that, but I felt like it was going to have one of those extra little things just in the movie itself, like those little things where it's a special acknowledgement that the actor playing the character had died. But obviously, it was only a week before release. There's no way they could have done it. But like you're saying, all the things they were saying hit extra hard because of what happened in real life that I don't even think they needed that little extra tag on there.
Yeah, there was a little dedication at the very end of the credits, just before or just after the post-credit scene, which obviously is nice to see. I mean, I almost wish to put it at the start of the credits, though, just so everyone would see it.
Oh, yeah.
But,
for sure.
You know.
That might be some regulations with like MPAA stuff.
Maybe, yeah, I'm not sure, but so the big thing is that Harbinger shows up and is like, look, John Wick's going around doing stuff. This is your fault. And Ian McShane, Winston's like, I shot him. It's like, yeah, but he lived. And I guess they're just going with the idea that Winston knew he'd survive and he wasn't really hoping he'd killed him or anything like that, which is kind of something we said was a strong possibility. But this was actually the thing that I was talking about earlier when I was saying that there's something that feels like it's kind of just ignored to an extent, is the idea that he betrayed John Wick. Because even when they meet each other, there's like a little slight awkwardness to it. But to be honest, after they say like 2 lines of dialogue, it's like, okay, ancient history, doesn't matter.
Yeah. It's an issue with how this movie is structured in general with the first part, in that there was, even before this scene, at the very, very beginning, we get this whole thing of the Bowery King walking into John Wick, who's just training. And it's prepping the viewer like, hey, remember last movie when he says he's going to be working with the Bowery King? This is it. We're going to be building up this whole thing with them. And then he doesn't show up again for 2/3 of the movie. And it's just this weird structure where obviously you need to know the last movie happened to know what's going on in this movie, but it seems superfluous how the movie ended in any meaningful way.
Yeah, I mean, even that opening, like, it's John training, he's getting back to health. It's been a few months or whatever long it's been for him to like train and get his body back in physical shape. And he just goes to the Elder in the desert, who's not the same guy. I don't know if this is an excuse because they had to recast it, or if this was like an actual point they wanted to make, is that the Elder just constantly changes to someone else. But it's like, it's not the same Elder as before. Killing me won't accomplish anything. And then John Wick obviously just shoots him. It's like it does almost feel like this was like towards the end of like a movie. Like the whole movie that was going to be the original fourth movie was this.
Yeah, exactly. It was. I firmly believe that, whether we get any confirmation or not. And I did go back and listen to our John Wick 3 review just before going to see this. Yeah, just so I had a refresher, because like you said, it'd been a month or so. And the one thing we kept on saying was, why did he keep on bowing down to the Elder? Why didn't he shoot the Elder? Why is it, this Elder felt so out of place? And I felt like this movie was a direct answer to that, where it was like, nah, he says like 4 words to the guy and then shoots him in the head. And all right, fair enough. We just wanted to make sure that we didn't have to worry about that. Because, as I said, this movie, we didn't like the Elder. We didn't like this person who was quote unquote above the table that had weird shamanistic powers. And so they took that away. And then they gave us the Marquis, who is this person above the table, able to make all of these rules, but he doesn't have these weird shamanistic powers. It's just taking this character that didn't fit the lore and replaced him with a character that felt more like it did.
Yeah. It's like I'm kind of of two minds, because some of it feels a little bit quick and a little bit just like not smooth as far as storytelling goes, but at the same time they are quickly just retconning things that I didn't like. So I guess I shouldn't,
Wasn't that the whole thing in the third movie of you do not find the elder, he'll find you?
Mm-hmm.
And then John just goes out in the first 5 minutes of this movie and finds the elder and shoots him.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously he's riding the horse, he's shooting the people. They don't make it look like it's easy, but the fact that it just cuts to him just arriving like that does make it feel like it was easy. You know, it doesn't feel like it was this tough
And
thing.
then the whole reason he's there is apparently to get back his wedding ring, which the elder took last movie, and then that is also dropped. That's also a thing where he's like, all right, guess it's gone anyway.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. It's not even just that this stuff is set. You know, the opening setting up, taking down the table, and maybe the elder you think would be the end of that. Is that there's even some conversations after this when he's in Japan, specifically with the daughter, with Shimazu's daughter, Mia, I think her name is.
Yes.
Where she's like, "Oh, make sure you kill the whole goddamn table," and he's like, "Yeah, I will." So, and I was kind of like, "Oh, so that's what the movie's going to be about." And then somewhere it just kind of shifts to just being about John winning his freedom again. Like it just becomes that again, which is fine. But I will say that I think what you really need to do here, right, especially since John seemingly dies at the end. We're in spoilers, so I can just kind of throw that out. Although I'm not necessarily convinced, and I'll say why later.
Okay.
But I think what it could have done, and again, I'm sort of tackling the negatives first.
That's fine.
But what it could have done, and what it should have probably done, is set up maybe just more of why he just wants to win his freedom again. Because the way I was kind of reading it, and I think it could have done more to like really get this across, is that he wanted to die a free man. He wanted to win his freedom, because that was the conversation that came up last movie with Winston, where he's like, you know, what man are you going to be? Are you going to be the killer, or are you going to be like the, you know, her husband, right? Who are you going to be when you finally go? And I think that was kind of why winning his freedom was important to him. And, you know, he seemingly dies right afterwards. And it's like, oh, he got to die a free man. He got to die just the husband.
Yeah, I think the mission statement of this movie happens just before the third act, where the Marquis says there are 3 types of men. Those who have something to die for, those who have something to live for, and those who have something to kill for. And they say that John, at this point, is none of those things. He's completely empty. He has no purpose at all. And I think the mission statement of this movie is John wants not to become one of those things, but he recognizes that he isn't any of those things anymore. And as such, he has no reason to continue on. So this is John's death march, more or less. And he's just trying, as you said, to clear the board before he does, to be able to say, no, I'm not in service to anyone. I don't die this killer in service of the table. I die John Wick loving husband.
Yeah, and I think that idea is solid. I just think it could have been maybe a little better set up. Admittedly though, I think it might work for me better in the second viewing, where I'm going in thinking that at the start. I think on the first viewing there was kind of that turmoil of sort of like adjusting as the movie was kind of aiming in a new direction at a certain point.
Even John was, because at the point where he meets up with Winston at Sharon's grave, Winston calls him out like, you're just going to keep killing people and they're just going to keep replacing them. None of this ends with you just killing more people. And I feel like that's the scene where John has to come to the realization of like, okay, now like I have to do something that's actually meaningful in some way rather than just killing over and over.
Yeah, I guess that's the scene that's supposed to make us shift from like just wanting to see him kill the entire table, but I don't know if it convinced me that we were leaving that behind yet.
No. But also, I think that scene entirely would work at the end of the 4th movie or at the beginning of the 5th. I mean, the place where it's at now, of the middle of this movie, it doesn't have that weight to it. It doesn't have, because we've seen John we had the Japanese guy, Shimazu's, just tell him, look, kill as many people as you can on the way out. Like, the entire goal here is kill. And then the very next scene after he gets out is, but what if killing isn't the right answer? It's just a bit of a whiplash between the two.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can put it in the middle of a movie, but I think you have to sort of dramatically make it a bigger deal in the moment. I think it has to be something that it feels like it's shaking John a little bit, and you have to see that he's looking for what his real goal is at this point.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the first kind of chunk of the movie, after our openings, is that he's hiding in Japan. He's hiding at the Continental in Osaka, and this is where Shimizu he runs the Continental here, and he's old friends with John. His daughter is not happy. What?
We somewhat skipped over it because I went back. They blew up the Continental. That happened. That was
the bad
this.
guys blew up the Continental, yes.
The Marquis said, "You worked with John, that's a no-no," and blew up the Continental. So, and then shot Sharon, obviously.
Yeah. I will say, I was uneasy when they went to see the Marquis, and it kind of felt like, yeah, he's probably going to want to shoot someone, and I kind of thought it might be Sharon, just because I feel like, Winston's going to stick around.
Yeah.
So, like...
I mean, because the entire time, they do the Hitchcock thing of they show you the timer, they show you the countdown via an hourglass of something's going to happen at the end of this, and it turns out to be the destruction of the Continental. But I thought that as soon as that timer hit 0, he was just going to flip around with the gun and shoot one of them. And when it didn't happen that way, I thought that both of them were going to be safe for 15 seconds until whoops.
You fool. You ignorant fool.
Yeah.
So, but the big first chunk of the movie mostly takes place in Japan. It's John hiding here, the daughter Mia not being happy because she knows that her father associating with John Wick is probably going to get their Continental destroyed as well and get everyone killed. It doesn't even take that long. There's sort of the main henchman of the Marquis is goatee, silver suit. He shows up with all the mercs pretty quickly to deal with things. And we're also introduced to the tracker character who we find out is called Mr. Nobody. At least that's what he says anyway. I'm sure that's not his real name, but that's what he's saying.
Anytime anybody asks him, who are you, like, what side are you on? Because that's the thing. He's not part of their system. He isn't wearing like a suit and tie like everyone else. He doesn't. He's just a guy who, as far as we could tell, is on the same sort of level as like Bowery King, where he knows about everything. He's aware how it works, but he works outside of it.
Yeah. But he's sort of looking for John as well, and kind of ominously looking. Sometimes he sort of steps in and helps a little bit. There's kind of an encounter here just when John's leaving after all the fighting, where John calls him a tracker, and he's like, "Oh, how much money's on my head, or whatever." And he's like, "Oh, not enough yet." This idea being that when it does reach a certain amount, he will step in and claim the bounty.
Yeah.
Which. That's been kind of a running thing since John Wick 1 is how much money is someone put out on John Wick's head. By the end of this movie, it's up to $40 million, I'm pretty sure.
Yep, which simultaneously, yes, of course, that's a huge amount of money. But it's so strange in today's world when you hear, these massive sums of money of billions, where 40 million kind of seems small in comparison. With every time we saw the Marquis on screen, and the tracker even specifically says it at one point of raise the bounty, you can afford it. They know there's so much more money being bought and sold here. So 40 million strangely seems, while it is huge, paltry in the way of their lifestyles.
I mean, yes and no. If you're a regular hitman,
oh yeah,
all the other hit jobs aren't paying 40. They're paying 1 or 2. For the most part, by the sounds of it. Maybe the odd one's 5 or 6 if it's a bit spicier. John Wick's just so wanted that even the 8 million in the first movie was quite tantalizing for a lot of them, and then it went up to 13 million or whatever in the second. It's been rising consistently.
I guess I'm more so considering it less on who would be receiving the money and more on who's putting out the hit.
Yeah.
Where I feel like the Marquis could afford to be nah, 100 million and wouldn't even blink an eye.
To be fair, Mr. Nobody, he looks like he's living quite,
The Bowery King.
Not quite homeless, but he looks like he's wearing normal, regular people clothes. He doesn't seem like he's got a lot of high-tech stuff. He
and that's fine.
A normal schlub.
But on the other side of that, if he were actually hurting for money that much, he would take out John at the first opportunity he had, because 13 million is better than 0.
It makes you wonder, if he's done this before with anyone else, that means he get paid a lot of money if his standards are so high. But why is he not rich then? Because he even says he wants to be rich. So does it mean that he was rich and he just blew it all on gambling or something? Is he just?
I don't know. I mean, it could
terrible with money.
He at least, because you get those gold coins for killing. That was established before, and he had at least one gold coin to check into the hotel.
That's true.
He's at least killed one person before.
At least one. So we introduced to Kane as well, who's brought in, and we know he's got a daughter that he doesn't actually. He stays out of her life, seemingly for safety reasons, but he goes and listens to her play because she's a violinist.
She's a busker.
Yeah, and basically he doesn't want to go after John Wick. He doesn't, want to even go after anyone. He's like, I'm no use to you. Like, leave me alone. But the Marquis having none of that. He wants him to go after John Wick, and outright threatens that if you don't, then your daughter might be the one who has to pay the price. So he's kind of roped into it. So we instantly get this kind of sympathetic character who, even before he sees John on screen, refers to him as a friend. Like that's the first thing he says. Marquis, like, he was a colleague of yours, right? He's like, he was a friend. He specifically says that. So it sets us up for the type of character. I think it is interesting that there's a lot of people at John Wick's kind of level, not so much in skill necessarily, although Kane kind of is. But even the Japanese guy, who's another actor, Hiroyo Sanada, you've seen him in a bunch of stuff. Like he's in tons of things. But there's kind of this sentiment of like a lot of people that are around John's age and sort of level in terms of their stature under the table that are all kind of ready to just throw it away. They're all kind of like done with it at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's the same sort of thing of, just any sort of society that has a government above it. Like, nobody actually likes the government. Everyone would love for something else to come in and do it, but until there's a suitable replacement or someone actually able to do something about it, what are you gonna do? I feel like it's that same sort of angst. Like, that's the thing that everyone can relate to, is rebelling against authority. Nobody likes to be told what to do.
Yeah.
Especially when every time we see the table in any of these movies, they're doing something awful. At no point is the table like, oh no, we're, providing guns to all of our assassins and whatnot. It's just, no. They're always putting down some law that's causing people to lose either their money or their homes or whatever.
Yeah. Although I would debate one point of what you just said there is that we never see the table. We hear of what they're doing.
the arms of the table. Like in this movie, you said the grunt guy who comes in with the goatee and everything. He comes in, he's like, hey, I'm working for the Marquis. The Marquis represents the table. We just deconsecrated your whole hotel. So step aside. And that's the sort of thing of,
honestly, if
the table working through him.
If they wanted to pull a Wizard of Oz twist at some point, and there's just one guy behind the curtain, like,
isn't that what the Elder really was though? Last movie?
No, because they're still implying there's a table with all these families that all sit at the table. Like, they're still going on this route. But we never actually see the table or being operated, so part of me is just thinking that there's just some teenager in like a basement somewhere with a computer who's just claiming to be all these like powerful people.
It's just Matthew Broderick in War Games.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
So obviously it does, it's funny how it kind of doesn't focus on John for a bit. It just focuses on Mia and her father, and we get a proper introduction to all them and nobody sort of arriving at the hotel. And
they do a great job in this scene of, they make sure to walk all the way from reception to where John is.
Yes.
So that way, when the fight has to go back the opposite way, you know exactly where we are the whole time.
Yeah, that's just smart plotting and direction. That's what that is. But, it takes a while to get to John. And even once we do see where John is and that he's hiding kind of in the back somewhere, out in this sort of like balcony outside. Well, not even a balcony.
I thought it was a rooftop, yeah.
Yeah, it's like a rooftop, yeah. And when you eventually do get to him, though, it still kind of stays away from him. Even once the fighting starts, it kind of stays away from him. It mostly focuses on the showdown between the Japanese guy and the henchman. Like, they're facing off, and then all the armed dudes come in, and all of the Japanese guys, like men, have their bows and arrows. They're fighting with samurai swords, things like that. There's like two sumo-looking guys who clearly have also bulletproof material because they just tank some hits.
Which when was that established? Second movie
established the suits, with the Kevlar in it.
that's just a give. Every single person that we meet now wears these suits.
Yeah, and to be fair, they do. I would be annoyed if it was just like a hand wavy thing where they said, "Oh, that's why they can all just tank hits." But to be fair, you constantly see John and some of the other characters that he's fighting. You constantly see them using the suits, like they're holding it up on their front of their face. They're still treating it like, yeah, this is like an active mechanic that we're using. So it's not just. It's just something we've written in so we can explain away things later. It's like, no, we're actually going to direct the action as if they're using it in strategical ways, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. My favorite scene regarding any of it, though, is actually just before the final showdown when John takes off his suit jacket and you just hear all the shells falling out of it. Because it's like, yeah, no, he's been hit like 36 times. There's going to be a few bullets wedged in there.
36? Well, like 300. But yeah, that's fair. Yeah. So yeah, you get a lot of fighting here. I did sort of laugh a little bit when the daughter Mia like took off her like sort of, you know, elegant Japanese concierge dress, and underneath is like a sort of like ninja cat suit, like waiting for fighting.
Just the Batman Catwoman sort of.
Yeah, it's exactly kind of like that. Yeah, it's like Catwoman's got her outfit ready. And yeah, honestly, one of the highlights here though is the way they build up to Kane getting involved, because he's in like silhouette eating noodles as the rest are all having a gunfight, and they're like, "Hey Kane, when are you going to get involved and do what you're here to do?" And he eventually just sort of gets up, and there's lots of little things he does, like he puts motion sensors on a bunch of surfaces so that when someone walks by them, it ding dongs, and he fires the gun at them, and it's like, oh, that's very effective. You quite quickly get what he's doing. It's, you know.
I felt that was pretty much, that first scene was the entire reason that they made Kane blind, because that's where they took full advantage of all the different mechanics of, you know, he doesn't know where any of his opponents are to start, so he just fires off wildly, and once he hears a response, that's when he's able to pinpoint in, and he's very good at keeping track of his surroundings. And that's constant in any of the fights here, is that you see him do things sort of wildly, but as soon as he gets a lock on someone, he's able to keep track of where they are and attack accordingly.
Yeah, one of the little performance details that I liked about Kane is that a lot of the time during the fight scenes, because he's blind and he's not necessarily having to look at anyone, I kind of like that sometimes he's not looking where you would expect someone to be looking when they're in a like his head's just kind of facing whatever direction as he's like fighting someone. He's not actually looking at them, which typically when two people are fighting each other, your eyes are locked on the other person. But his entire head's just facing randomly in the distance because it doesn't matter to him. And that felt like a very conscious performance choice, and it did make him look more unique when he was fighting as a result.
Yeah, his fighting style was extremely unique. I'd say even more so than John or the Tracker, who are other big players here. He's one, when he's on screen, even if it was silhouette, I think you'd be able to tell his fighting style compared to everyone else's.
Sure, yeah. Of course, his Kane's also a blade, which he uses a bunch as well. So yeah, so all this fighting happens. You kind of think it's building up to Shimazu dying. Of course it does. And he has kind of a showdown with Kane. Kane's already had his showdown with John, admittedly, at this point. This comes after all their fighting.
Shimazu and Kane have literally the Kill Bill Volume 1 fight out in the cherry blossom garden on a bridge over a pond. They have the most stereotypical samurai showdown I've ever seen in my life, and I loved it.
Oh, it's absolutely intentional. This is supposed to be a homage to, like, it feels like it's doing homages to different types of action cinema, and this is kind of one of the ones it's going for. And Kane, like, basically begs him not to fight him so he doesn't have to kill him, and, does. And that sets up this idea, which is also very Kill Bill, actually, that the daughter is going to harbor a grudge against him for killing her father. So that's something that we should keep in our minds. The fight with John, though, we should mention, there's a couple of nice little bits. There's like a moment where, like, John falls and he's very quiet, and Kane thinks, "You dead, John?" Yeah. And John's like sort of looking over it because his guns ran out, and he's looking over at this other gun that's dropped from one of the guys that he's killed, and he's like, we try to get it, and then obviously the broken glass just creaks a little bit, and it's like shit, and then the fighting starts.
I do appreciate that they didn't make Kane Daredevil, where he has this super attuned hearing. It's like, no, a normal person would be able to hear this glass crunching under John's weight.
Yeah, for sure.
But he wasn't able to hear John's like breathing or his heartbeat or anything like that.
Yeah, like I think you could if you were perfectly calm, but he's also out of breath because he's been fighting as well. So obviously the sound of his own breathing will be masking John's breathing, within reason. So that was like one of the fun little inventive things there. Like I say, the right before this, when it was just it was like for some reason just two guys at a time coming in to fight him. It felt like that went on for a little bit too long. But
I think the only reason why is they really wanted to do the nunchuck scene.
That's right. John's got some nunchucks and he is whipping people in the face with them.
But as soon as you get more than like two guys, it's hard to choreograph. How is he not actually being mobbed right now? It's either they aren't in the room or they're standing around him in a circle and attacking him Power Ranger style.
Which I do appreciate that everything he did with the nunchucks wasn't necessarily what you expect. There's a couple of points where he just like has both hands on one part of the nunchuck and he's just whipping the other end into someone's head.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, that just feels very visceral, but also like I'm sure he does know what he's doing because at one point he does a couple of the whip arounds and holds them properly. Yeah. But at the same time, when you're just holding it with both hands and just whipping the other end into your head, that's something I would do with the nunchucks because I've not trained with them. That's like the amateur, like just violent thing to do with them.
Well, there was one moment specifically I remember they brought attention to was John kept on, it was he's fighting two guys and every time he turned to the guy on the left, he kept on hitting him in the head with it enough to like stun him for a second. And he did that like 3 times. And then when it came to the 4th time, the guy covered his head as to not get hit again. Then John just takes the nunchucks to his nuts. It's like, all right, well, yeah, you planned it out. Good choreography, cause and effect. It makes sense.
Yeah. And that's also a joke. Like he's
like
you say there's not a lot of comedy, but that was a joke scene. That was a joke moment, I should say.
It was, but it was not brought attention to. Is the thing. Like if you were watching the other guy for even that half second where it happened, you wouldn't have noticed.
Well, I think that's what makes it funnier, though. I think humor is way funnier typically when you don't treat it like, there's a punchline there. Everyone
see this? Yeah. It's hilarious.
It's the sort of thing maybe if you don't notice it the first time, but when you notice that the second or third time you watch it, you're going to be like, oh shit, that's really funny.
Yeah, it's
really funny that's there, and the fact that they're able to slip it in without most people noticing just makes it funnier. That's just how it works. So John gets away. He goes back to New York, I guess, next to
there is the one moment where he has the only like 3 seconds with Mia basically on the train, basically lining up, hi, I'm a character who is fully franchisable. Good to see you. I'll see you in 3 years.
Yeah, I was expecting her to come back. I know she does in the post-credit scene, but I was expecting her to be someone that they'd set up for later in the movie.
Yeah. But I thought she was going to be like the thing that saves John from Kane. But no, she's just gone.
Yeah. It's got a little bit of that shared universe. We're trying to build other things here. So John goes back to New York and sort of to Sharon's grave and apologizes. I should say apologize. I mean, gives his, sorry for your loss. That
condolences.
Condolences. Thank you. That was the word I was looking for. I apologize. I was not there to kill the bastard.
I'm sorry I killed Sharon. My bad.
But he, like you said, Winston gives him these this speech about where's it going to end, what are you going to do after you've killed them. They're just going to replace them, so on and so on. And it's like, hey, the Marquis after you, right? This guy's put in charge. The table have basically given him a new seat. He wasn't on the table before, but he's got a conditional seat that if he kills you, he will then get that seat. And they've given him the full power of the table and everything at their disposal to come after you. So John's like, all right, where is he? He's like, Paris. Right, I'm going to go kill him then.
Yep, just marches off, going to go. But then Winston stops him and says, hey, here's the thing, though. There's a way to kill him and also guarantee your freedom. And he invokes the new rules that we had not established before, where you can basically challenge anybody on the table to single combat.
Here's the thing. I didn't like this when he brought this up because it was like another just rule. We're just adding on too many like things to the mythology at this point.
Yes.
It feels a little bit silly. That said, though, like any decent made action movie, even if the premise of something at the start feels a bit ridiculous, when you actually see it all play out later, you don't care anymore because it was just too much fun to actually go through. So I don't want to like even critique it too much or complain about it, but in the moment I thought, oh, this sounds a bit shit. Luckily, the rest of the movie played out wonderfully, so it doesn't matter.
Oh,
but
yeah, no, this was as soon as they said, oh, there's this old law, and I'm like, all right, here we go, the old rules, the ones that are deep magic from before the dawn of time. It's like, all right, whatever.
It's an old rule that most people at the table don't even remember this really exists.
Yeah, exactly. But like you said, I love it because laying down this rule, they then established the plot, which was back in, I think it was the second movie, when he tore his ticket with his family in Russia. No, that was the third movie. He tore his ticket with his family in order to get safe passage. He has to go and basically mend that. And then...
Well, yeah, just to explain why.
Yeah.
You can only invoke a duel at the table or around the table. And this is not a literal table, obviously. Just
beneath the tablecloth.
Is if you are part of one of the families connected to the table. So he has to go back to the family that he left behind and basically beg to be let back in. And of course, they don't want to let him back in. They hate his guts now.
Yeah.
However, it turns out that someone killed one of the family members. And if John can go and take care of him, then maybe we'll think about it.
So this is the one part in the movie where I think that they really wanted you to forget one of the things they set up in the third movie, which is nobody is allowed to help the excommunicated with anything. Because if you remember, the adjudicator went around and like viscerally hurt the people who were helping John, even mildly.
Yeah.
And I feel like they were like, okay, that kind of limits our options here if he's completely separated from the world, so I guess we'll just let him in again. That being said, I guess is he technically excommunicated still? Because the elder did reverse that on condition that he kill Winston, but then he didn't kill Winston. So I don't know where he actually stands in terms of communication.
I don't think anything really contradicts it, like per se. You know, the excommunicado thing. I think the idea is that if they accept him and he invokes the duel, then it doesn't matter if he's excommunicado, because at that point, like, if he wins the duel, then whatever his terms are, it'll be fine. And presumably one of them, which, you know, obviously it's going to be freedom specifically, but one of them you presume is, I'm not excommunicado anymore. Stop.
Right, but I'm saying that them even letting him back into the family would have been helping him, even though he was excommunicated. That's what I'm saying.
Well, no, not necessarily, because like he tore his ticket to help to get out, right? When he was already excommunicado in the last movie. So he was still part of a family when he was excommunicated.
But he was punished for that. The family, remember the one lady who ran the ballet was punished for helping him despite he still had his ticket.
Yeah. Well, I think this just fits back into we're trying to like take some power back because there's some people at the table we don't like, and that's what
I'm sure.
Because that's the other key thing here is that John points out, if this is an official duel, then we can fix this properly, and you know, all of us, you know, we can actually get what you want. So he goes off to kill this guy who killed like this high-ranking member of the family, right? The uncle or whatever he was. Yeah. And that leads us to the character I hated the most in the entire movie, which is this big fat guy with gold teeth who, and it's not so much his look, but I mean, his look is definitely over the top, but it's like he's got this cheesy, like, villainous laugh that he lets out. It feels like they're going for like a Jabba the Hutt, but like poker dealer guy.
I could see it.
That's what he is.
He's definitely just I feel that his entire character, if you had to boil it down to one word, is sleaze.
Yes.
That's what he's supposed to represent. And it works. It absolutely does. But it is a character you're not supposed to like. And I think that might have backfired a little bit.
I think he felt so over the top that not that John Wick's a grounded world, but it's not a silly world. right?
Yeah.
And when they do things that feel sillier, it takes me out of it, like the Elder in the desert, like this asshole. And, you know, he wants to play a game, a round of poker for who gets to kill him.
Because for some reason, Kane was already there waiting for John because he figured out this would be the plan. And then the tracker tracked him here.
Yes.
And instead of them just unloading and just taking the shot, or in Kane's case, he has the sword on him, just stabbing John, they decide, no, we'll entertain this notion and just play a poker game to see who gets to kill John.
Now, that said, I did think that the lighting in this scene was absurdly cinematic. Like,
oh my god,
this is like, it's almost so too cinematic to the point where obviously all lighting in movies is orchestrated to get a specific look, and it's all none of it's just happenstance, right?
Yep.
But this is so over the top with and I know it's like this is like the back room of like a rave club or something, right?
Okay, can we just pause there? How many goddamned raves are in these universes? Like, this has to be at least the 7th rave that John just happens to be at. Why is everything set at a rave? It is a lot.
There was one
raves.
in the first movie, there's one in the second movie. Was there one in the third movie? I don't remember.
Probably. I have to assume so. There's been one per movie every time.
Well, your math's a bit off then, because it's only the 4th movie.
Okay, when I say things big like that, it means I'm exaggerating.
Well, yes, but look, it's a staple of the series. There's always a scene at a rave.
I guess this one just seemed the most out of place because in the first one, you know, the guy was hanging out of the rave, the guy who was hunted down. That makes sense. The second one, it was a celebration for that person being inducted to the high table. So that made sense. Third one, we can't even remember if there was one. This one, it was a backroom poker thing, which was dead silent for a lot of it. And then you just go down the hallway and there's this crazy dance club scene going on.
Well, Killer owns this place. They set that up.
Fair enough, but it still felt super weird to just have these two settings
at
next
least
to
it
each
made
other.
the lighting make sense because there's this like big circle like array of lights that kept spinning around and making like, you know, fancy shapes in the background. There's the big fan spinning, so you get the shadow of the fan. Like it's so absurdly cinematic that it's like almost too much to the point where I'm like, this just feels like unbelievable that any lighting would ever naturally result in this.
Yeah,
you know,
that's fair.
But,
I mean, I did say at the very beginning, this is possibly the most stylistic entry in the entire franchise.
Yeah, but like when it's a sunrise or a sunset or something with a city or whatever, it's like, okay, that's still quite natural in the sense though that it's just you're catching it at the right time and you're going for a look. This is like really orchestrated. But that said, it did look good, and I specifically thought Donnie Yen looked really cool. There's a moment or an extended period of this scene where he's just got a gun pointed at Killer, and he's got the sunglasses on, he's in his suit, and he's just pointing the gun, and it's just the shot looking at him is very. It looks like the cover to what's that John Woo movie? There's a cover. There's a poster that looks exactly like him sitting there pointing that gun. I think it's Chow Yun-fat that's in it, but it doesn't matter.
The Killer?
Possibly the Killer. Yes.
Looks like it. What it reminded me of was a video game called No More Heroes. Yeah, that sort of vibe going on.
Sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, obviously it breaks out into a fight. Eventually.
I mean, this scene, if you're talking about thematic and like cinematic stuff, so they flip over their 5-card draw. They show their hands. John, of course, has the dead man's hand of aces and eights. I think that next up was Kane, who had 4 of a kind. Then it went to Tracker, who had a royal flush. And then finally Killa flipped his hand, and it was 5 of a kind. But then it led into one of my favorite comedic beats, which was Kane and John just being like, yeah, I figured he would probably cheat. He's a prick like that.
It wasn't even just that. Kane actually said, let me guess, 5 of a kind. It's like,
yeah,
that's a very accurate prediction, given the fact that you can't see those cards.
He also said what his cards were in his hand without being able to see them. Borderline magic.
He's feeling the ink. It's a slightly raised on the card, I guess. I don't know.
But that just goes back to borderline magic.
It's a special set of cards with some braille on them. I don't know. What do you want?
Okay, sure.
What do you want from me? Those
I'm not
definitely
asking for an
exist.
I'm not saying it's not, and I'm also not asking for an explanation. But the movie played it off as borderline magic.
Sure, but you know, and it is this thing where Kane's kind of working with John in this fight scene to an extent.
I mean, all three of them are working together against Killa, it seems.
Yeah. And obviously Killa sends a lot of men towards John. The fight breaks out into the rave. There's like a big water feature that John ends up fighting in for an extended period.
Yeah.
You know, so again, absurd visuals because we're at this really interesting location that's, you know, maybe even designed with this feature in mind. Like, I don't know if they found this or they actually just built it, but
it seems built.
Yeah. So, yeah.
I think at this point, one thing we haven't mentioned yet is Tracker has a dog companion that I felt, as we said in the last movie, one of the things that felt like a cool idea that they didn't run with enough was the dog companions to, I forget what actress it was.
Halle Berry.
Halle Berry, that's right. This movie I felt was that same thing, but done better, done correctly, where it isn't the dog's just on their own. The dog follows Tracker's commands, and he has this deep emotional bond with it to make him, this is where I felt he was closer to the anti-John Wick in the dog-loving scenario.
I don't think I ever got anti-John Wick because I just don't think he ever had any... Like, he didn't have a lot of actual combat scenes, and when he did, they didn't feel like as impressive as John. Whereas Kane, they was specifically went out of their way to show he is equally at least as skilled as John Wick in a fight.
That's fair. I think for me, the reason I thought Tracker was able to hold his own is that he keeps on bailing John out. Whenever it seems John is in over his head, he comes in and saves it. So, yes, he's able to get the contract himself, but he's able to still do things that John wasn't able to do. Just by value of surprise, of course, but still able to do it.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean he can hold himself in a fight the way John can against multiple people.
But he does. In the end of the movie, he does, though. During the abandoned house set piece.
He does it a little bit, but it never looks quite as impressive as what John does, though, I don't think.
And that's fair. No, it never... I mean, John gets all the most impressive-looking stuff.
Well, yeah, but that's my point, though, is... Yeah, no, but he does have all the most impressive-looking stuff, because Kane is equally impressive in this, if not more impressive.
Yes, I will agree that, but I also think a large part of that is because of his unusual fighting style. That's what makes it look even more impressive. We're taking into it the fact that he is unable to see, and therefore he's able to do these cool things.
It's still visually impressive, though.
No, it is visually impressive.
Nobody didn't do anything visually impressive, and I'm not saying that it can't. I'm saying that the movie didn't go out of its way to show it. So there was nothing to suggest to me that he is equal to John in any way.
All right, fair enough.
You know, I wasn't even I thought he might be bluffing the entire movie, because honestly, the standout scene he has, which came before this, is when he goes to see Marquis, and Marquis stabs him in the hand when he's like sort of bartering for more money, and says, you know, a coward like pulls the knife out of your hand, but like a
complete sociopath would just move the hand.
Yeah, would rip your hand out from the blade, and that's what he does. And you know, he doesn't come out of that scene feeling strong. He doesn't come out of that scene, you know, the entire time. The idea of John building up to like actually meeting Marquis one-on-one, you think, oh, John's going to eat you for breakfast, you don't have a chance. But when he's with nobody, it kind of feels like he does like have the better of nobody. He does belittle him, he does make him feel small.
Right, but the fact that scene came nearly immediately after the scene where Tracker had John in his sights back in Osaka, and he was saying like, hey, no, you know, contract's not quite big enough, that's the only reason you're still alive. I felt that was to show that Tracker had the hand up on John, at least in that scene, and then Marquis had the hand up on Tracker, which is just selling the strength of Marquis more.
I don't think I agree with him having the hand up on John. It didn't feel like he actually had any advantage. Like that conversation to me felt very much akin to what John's had in other movies with other characters, where he just kind of like calmly asks like, what's the deal? You know, whether it's when he ran into Common in the second movie, or the other guy in the Continental that he he gave the woman to look after.
Yeah.
Just little moments like that where you just very matter-of-factly ask, who are you and what's your purpose, kind of thing.
Okay, that's fair.
So, anyway, like, I will say, though, at this point in the movie, I was sort of thinking, like, okay, I'm expecting a lot of big set pieces, and it did deliver. Like, it has the best set pieces of the entire franchise in the last 45 minutes. But at this point in the movie, we're like halfway through, and I thought, yeah, that was an alright fight scene in the rave and the water feature, and some of the stuff in Japan was good, particularly with Kane, but I was thinking, it's not... I feel like the other movies had, like, bigger set pieces by this point. I was starting to think, is the action kind of like, have they not thought of any cool new ideas? And obviously, that's a silly thought once you've seen the rest of the movie. But
absolutely.
But it's definitely all back, like, loaded. None of it's in that first 2/3. Like, all the really cool stuff is in that last third, which isn't necessarily a bad thing for an action movie. In many respects, you should argue that you would build up to your best stuff. But I would actually say that in reality, that's actually really the case. Most action movies, their best, like, set piece tends to be in Act 2, sometimes even earlier. It's actually really common. If you pay attention to a lot of action movies, you'll find that, I was about to bring up a video game movie that we're doing next month. I won't spoil thoughts. But
that's fair.
It is something that happens. So it was actually kind of refreshing in a way, but there was a little inkling of worrying at this point where I'm like, the action's been solid, but it's not been, like, special or doing anything great yet.
I think the biggest issue at this point as well, I mean, I assumed that the entire last hour was just going to be John kills the entirety of Paris, but I think the biggest issue at this point right here is that it spends a good probably half an hour just prepping for that, and it's deep in the lore, it's deep in just characters talking to each other, and it feels very, I don't want to say sluggish because it keeps a good pace the whole way through, but it feels very calm. And after everything else we had, it's needed to have the moment of calm to make it burst into action that much more, but it does set expectations a bit lower.
Do you know what it is, actually? Do you know what I'm thinking it is? This whole killer thing where he's having to go and get Killer and prove that he's killed him so he can get back out of the family so they can
issue the duel,
right? That's the whole point here. It's all a bit side questy, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Right? It's all side questy, and this is going back to the video game comparison. This is just the means to the end. This is the task you have to complete so you can do the real task that's important later. And I think fundamentally it kind of always just feels that way because it's, this is like, this killer guy is not important to the overall movie. Not really, right? He's just there to be this obstacle that John has to get over. And I think everything around him feels a little bit bloated. I mean, obviously that's not a fat joke. He's literally bloated himself. But just in the sense that we do spend so much time, like this scene where they're sitting talking to him and they're playing poker, does last quite a bit of time. And fundamentally, it's not really building to the confrontation with the real villain. It's servicing, like, an element of the plot, the, like, John has to achieve X thing, but part of me almost thinks, like, you could have just rewritten the script to not have the requirement of him being in the family. See if you just wrote the script so Winston said, you can issue a duel to someone from the table and they have to, accept it, and just leave out that extra rule that you have to be in a family. No one, I think, would question it. No one would even think about it.
I mean, you're right, but here's the thing. The poker scene, while yes, it was a slower moment, I immediately took that to be, this is our Western homage. This is everyone's sitting around the saloon, guns pointed at each other under the table, and we're just doing a full Western homage for...
I mean, I can see why you're saying that. I still take the ending as more of a Western homage, but I can see why you're saying it about this as well.
Yeah.
But the ending is absolutely a Western homage. The music goes full Western. They're doing, a duel with pistols. The whole thing is very...
I just think they also did it here because there was a lot in this movie that was Western homage. You had the riding through the desert, even in the second scene of this movie, and shooting guys on horseback through the desert. It seemed very, like you said, it was doing homages of a bunch of different action periods throughout.
I think what's interesting as I'm talking about the movie, going through it, is that I'm realizing how much it really is the last 45 minutes that I really loved, because the rest of it, I'm constantly saying, this is what's wrong with this part, this is what's wrong with this part. This is why it feels kind of sluggish at this point. I do think the first 2/3 of this movie do suffer, and it's not until they sit down and set the rules and the terms of the duel where I feel like, okay, they've set up what this movie's now really properly building to. Yeah, they mentioned there was going to be a duel earlier, and that was probably always going to happen. But that's when the movie feels like it's starting to ride in that direction. It feels like we're actually building to the real thing now. And, you know, it's not too long after this when he becomes a member of the family. He burns the symbol into his arm, and
that part was so who cares, you know?
Yeah,
I understand that. I understand that they made a whole specific thing of he is part of the family, sure, whatever. But in order to issue the duel, he also needs a crest. And I'm guessing this thing burned into his arm is the crest, considering that he had to present it to the Harbinger. But it never comes up. It's never a thing. That's the part that felt like it could have been cut to me.
Oh yeah, it just shows him it. Yeah, I could have cut that too. Yeah, you're right. I could have cut that. But no, like Winston goes to the Marquis and presents him with the challenge, and is like, yeah, and I'm seconding him, so I get something out of this if he wins, which is I get my hotel back, and I'm in charge of my hotel, damn it. So Winston's always angling, but to be fair, it also points out quite quickly that if John loses, then Winston also gets executed. He also gets killed. So he is putting a lot of faith in John.
Oh, absolutely.
To be fair. And I do think this is where it makes some smart choices with the villain. He's still over the top in his performance, but him weaseling out of actually being the one in the duel and saying, no, I'm going to put Kane in. He's going to be my my avatar.
He's my champion.
Yeah, my champion, yes. He's going to be the one who actually does the fight. And it's like, okay, interesting.
I do love how later on in the movie, the second in command, like the big grunt guy, comes up and be like, I don't like that you put a blind man in a pistol duel 30 meters apart. That seems like a bad move.
Yeah. But he's like, no, he's got something to die for and live for. He'll do the thing. So yeah, but they have this meeting, they sit down at a table, they turn over these, it's basically they turn over cards, and whoever has the higher number gets to pick that part of the duel. So up first is like, what time is the duel taking place? Winner picks sunrise. Which
I do really appreciate the fact that the Marquis wanted to do sunrise. John wanted to do it right then. He's like, we're doing this now. I'm not giving you any time to do anything. Well, yeah, and of course he loses for our entire third act. But
yeah, it makes sense that the Marquis is the weasel. He's not a fighter. He wants to hide. He wants to make someone else do it. And not only that, he wants to try and stop John Wick, because they make it very clear, okay, sunrise tomorrow is when this is happening, and if either of the competitors don't make it, they forfeit and they will be executed. And that's what leads us to our third act entire premise, is that the Marquis puts out such a big hit on John Wick to stop him from making it to the church where they're going to have this duel, out in the steps of this church, that the entire city, so he's like, okay, I'll travel some of this through the under the canals, the passageways under the city, because Paris is famous for having the sewage rivers effectively that match the street layout, and he gets as far as he can down there, but this entire last 45 minutes is him going through tons of assassins who are trying to stop him from making it on time to his duel, which means that even when he gets there, which you assume he does because it's a movie, he's going to get to the climax, he's going to be a wreck. He's going to have went through so many assholes. Like he's going to...
I mean, you say that he's going to make it there, and while yes, obviously from an external perspective it does seem like it, but if you don't keep track of the time in the movie, if you're not sure how much time is left until the end, I think that there is a fair shake that you assume that he doesn't make it, and the fifth movie is him dealing with the fallout of it.
Okay, I could see you going that way, but I think obviously just before we get to talking about those last 45 minutes, there's a few little things to mention. So up until this point in the movie, there's, with all the new visuals that it's got going for, all these other things, like, I joked earlier, does it even feel like it's in the same world as that first John Wick anymore? Right. And one of the things that finally ties it back is he goes to this church, and Kane's there, and because they've got like a dual plan now, Kane's not just like trying to kill him. He's there as a friend. They're sort of sitting down and they share a bit of quiet time together. But he brings up his wife. He comes and lights a candle, and Kane asks, like, "Do you believe she can hear you when you speak to her?" And he's like, "No." He's like, "Why do you do it then?" He's like, "What if I'm wrong? Like, what if I'm wrong?" So but it reminds you, okay, this is all going back to his wife, and this is where I think it starts to come together a little bit, and this is where it feels like it's building up to the big final act, and it's setting up this idea of what he wants, and it further does it, of course, right before he goes on up to the street, where he talks to Winston about Sharon and his funeral, and he's like, "I didn't know what to put on the tombstone. Like, how do you sum up an entire life?" So I just put a friend, because that's what he was. And John, just before he leaves, he turns to Winston and says, "Loving husband." And he's like, "What?" It's like, "That's what I want on mine, loving husband." And that's the time where it sets you up for thinking, John might be dying at the end of this movie. This is the telegraphing.
Yeah. The moment that you talk about what's on your tombstone to somebody who can actually do something about it, you may as well be a CW show and have a slight cough.
I think, honestly, for me, to an extent, it's when they meet to discuss the rules, because the villain is like proper slimy, and then he's setting up his plan. He's like, "Oh, he's not going to make it to the jail. We're going to like put him through a gauntlet." And I do love that it kept cutting back to him looking at a model of the center of Paris, and he's looking at it, and it's sort of like saying, "Okay, this is where John is," and you've got the radio host who's working for the villains or whatever, like talking.
I mean, it's the table. It's those same people who handle all the concentration and the bounties and whatnot.
Which, by the way, the people who manage the accounts in Paris work inside the Eiffel Tower. That's how big up the table are. They've got an office in the Eiffel Tower. But but I think it's really from when he goes to the church and you have this quiet moment between him and the guy he's going to duel with, who don't want to fight each other. They respect each other, but they're both forced into this because of the where they are in life. John doesn't hate him for it. He understands that he's been forced, and
also he's technically not being forced is the thing, but the Marquis is throwing out that if he does this, him and his daughter are free the same way John was out. He doesn't have to worry about it at all. But if he doesn't, his daughter will be straight up killed.
Yeah.
So
that's still forced.
That's pretty forced. Yeah.
I'd still call that forced. But I think John understands that. I think at one point he asks about his daughter. And the same with Kane and the Japanese guy at the start. They kind of talked about their daughters to each other. It's like there's like a shared understanding. So like John doesn't hate him for what he's doing. He understands why he's going to fight and why he's going to do it to the best of his ability. And I think that sort of like bond between those two really was the strongest thing in the movie up until that point. And then from here to the end, it's just okay. All the action scenes are fantastic. They do things that you've maybe never seen before. They're a gauntlet. It's this like turmoil of John trying to get to the duel, and I think it kind of keeps topping itself bizarrely as well, which is very impressive. Oh, yeah. So to go through these, right? I think we just go through them one by one. I don't think you skip ahead. I think you.
Okay. All right. Step one: why I will never walk anywhere near a car in Paris.
Yeah, so the Arc de Triomphe, or Triomphe, whatever pronounce it.
The big arch.
Yeah, the big arc. So very famous, obviously, landmark, right? It's a famous location, busy traffic going around it. It's effectively a big roundabout, at least from the looks of it. I don't know, I've never driven there. But we get this fight scene that spills in and around that area. It does have some parts where John is in a car. He sort of grabs a car and does some fancy stuff where he's dragging people. There's a great bit where, like, this is probably right at the start before it really gets to the arc itself, but he gets hit by a car and he's still in the hood of the car, but then the car crashes into something else, so he sort of hits the side of the bus.
It's fantastic. Can I just say this is the beginning of the entire third act.
The gauntlet.
And it starts off with a French rendition of Paint It Black.
It does, yeah.
And it's just so perfect. It just gets you pumped up into the right mood for this entire scene. Yeah, I thought that was the best music choice in the whole film, was that right there.
Yeah, and John's like fighting these guys, and they're, it's in and around busy traffic. Some of them are like landing in the cars. like I'd have to watch it again to actually pick it, like detail down every single great little moment that happens in it. But it is like an unrelenting, like solid 10 minutes of fighting in busy traffic. And the director, I think, said this past week that it is the hardest scene they shot in the entire franchise.
Oh, I'm sure. There was one shot in here that really stood out to me, which was there was a bunch of people all standing in like a centralized crowd, and then John kept drifting his car around them and just firing shot after shot, and the camera was always perpendicular to John, just following that around. Beautiful angle.
Yeah, no, like the camera work and the way it captured it, and the fact that it's not just, I'm sure there's some CG in there to help with some things, but they had stunt drivers, they had cars driving around them, and you can feel the realness of that as you're watching it. It feels dangerous. It feels like they're just dodging things. It's really exciting. And I was like, okay, this was the first action set piece in the movie where I'm like, all right, you're doing something truly impressive here, and this already might be the best action set piece that you've done in this franchise. And I think it's topped after this. I think it gets better after this.
Yeah. So the only other thing I want to add in that is, like I said, I think there must have been at least 24 people just onto the hood of cars.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody stops. Nobody slows down. What in the hell is going on in Paris?
Vive la France!
I'd be terrified to live anywhere near there if that is a common occurrence.
They just don't give two baguettes.
I guess.
That's all it is.
Oui.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. The movie feels so much bigger, partly just because it's so globe-trotty. Like, we do a big section in Tokyo, a big section in Paris,
And Berlin was...
Oh, Berlin has with killers,
Which is weird because the third movie had technically that same thing of him going to all these different locations, but it still didn't quite feel as big in the long run.
No, I think part of it was just the visuals. Like, when they're in Tokyo, everything's very colorful constantly. Mm-hmm. Even the train just before they leave, where he's talking to Mia. But that train station is like the nicest train station I've ever seen in my life. It looks so pretty.
Yeah. No, I'm sure that's something that Japan is very proud of.
Oh, yeah. And then obviously when you're in Paris, you've got all the this gorgeous architecture, especially when you get to the sunrise stuff at the end, and you're just looking over at the city.
The City of Lights.
Yeah. So, no, it's good stuff. But, so... From here, we end up fighting in a building. The fight spills to a building, and there's two key things to talk about in this scene. One, of course, is how it's shot, right? Once it gets going, not all of it, but there's an extended portion of it, the main set piece of it, which is all shot from the top down. And they've done it in like a set where obviously there's no ceiling, so they're passing from room to room as John is just shooting tons of people. And it's, people are calling it the Hotline Miami scene because that's kind of what that game is. It's just you fighting room to room, all top down.
It's exactly that scene.
But on top of that, and this is the thing that I liked even before that shot started, and this is, and again, so video gamey. But you know how when you play a video game, and some games will be like, okay, here's your special ammo that's like fire based.
Yep.
He gets a shotgun that fires like incendiary rounds. And he is... So every time he fires the shotgun rounds, you can just see this burst of, like, fire, like, around the pellets, basically.
And they specifically make sure he picks that up just before the one shot of the overhead view.
Yeah.
So that you're able to keep track of, like, here's how John is angled, because we know this is an unconventional style.
Yeah, that's the smart thing about it, is that every time he fires, there's this bright flash, and whoever gets hit gets like a sort of circle of fire on them, right? And if you're watching closely, you can actually sort of tell, like, because normally you don't necessarily see like the spread of the pellets, or whatever you want to call them, when a shotgun blast goes off. But because these are all lighting up, you can actually kind of see the circle of little balls that are flying at the people. But the genius thing about this is that not only is it just a cool weapon in the sense that it's visually kind of satisfying to see him just like do this, because it's like fire's cool, let's be honest, fire's just a cool thing.
Oh yeah.
Right? When it's used properly. But the genius of this is that it's visually making it easy to watch. Like you say, this top down shot where you always know who John is because he's the one firing the flaming shotgun.
Yep. Because it isn't a thing where John is always center frame. The camera moves, it glides in a constant motion, a constant velocity across the scene. It changes angles and whatnot. But John, he sometimes is off to the side. Sometimes he's completely off camera and then he makes his way back on. But it is a distinct visual thing of, John is the only one who is literally firing fire. And you're able to immediately lock onto his position wherever it happens. My only critique with this entire sequence is that it's interrupted in the middle. They take a little like 2-shot thing to say, here's what the tracker's doing, and then they go back to it.
Yeah, and it goes back to it. I would even say it's the middle. I'd say it's like 3/4 in. It's like I'd say most of it's first, but then it goes back to it for just a little bit extra, and then it was like, that was a little bit weird. But it's a very exciting sequence though. It's very visceral. It's very impressive from a filmmaking perspective. So you kind of, and I think action scenes in a lot of ways, the best ones usually are impressive from a filmmaking perspective. That's usually partly what makes them cool, is how it's shot. And this top down is definitely something that I've not seen done certainly to this extent. Maybe there's like a top down action scene that you can find in a movie somewhere, but not one that moves from room to room as much as this one does. In this way.
The only thing that it reminded me of mildly was there was that sequence in El Camino, the Breaking Bad sequel, where Jesse's tearing apart the house, and it's just the entire house you can see from that top view, but it's not following him around. It's just a static image, which, of course, for an action movie, it makes sense that it would have more motion to it than anything else.
I've definitely seen movies that have had scenes where they transition from one room to the other this way, where they'll go over the top, and it'll be, there'll be like the edge of where the wall is, but the camera will just go over it.
Yeah.
But this is obviously taking that up to 11 and just going.
Isn't that really just the tagline of the whole movie? We're just taking it up to 11.
Which, if there is a fifth movie, they have to go to another ammo type. They have to do acid rounds.
Yeah. I will say, I think I made the comment last review that I thought for certain, because of them trying out new environments and whatnot, that there was going to be a scene that was like completely pitch black, and the only thing you would see is like the shots being fired and whatnot. Didn't get that, but we did get a blind guy, so I'm going to take the half win.
And you do kind of follow this with the fire into that shotgun, so that is kind of like following the light in a way.
3/4 win.
Excellent. And then the third part of this gauntlet, which may be my favorite part, because it's so simple and
beautiful
and what it is, but he literally has to go up this giant like set of stairs, right? This multi-tiered stairway that goes up. It's an outside set of stairs going up, and it's near the church. It's just it's once he gets up to the top, he just has to walk down a little bit, and there he is. But he has to fight guys on the way up, and sure enough,
they specifically say it's 222 steps.
Oh, there you go.
That he has to take,
and he's fighting his way up these steps. He's fighting bad guys, and he's doing what he can, and it's all very exciting watching him go up. And then he gets like near the top, not quite at the top, but near the top. And the henchman with the goatee, the main sort of fighter that we've been dealing with for the bad guys the whole movie, just kicks him down the stairs, and he just rolls all the way down to the bottom. And they make a point of emphasizing that he's only got a couple of minutes now until the deadline to get there. And you think, shit, that's it. He's lost because he's all the way back down at the bottom of the steps. There's no way he's getting back up. And that's when Kane comes in and says, I'm going, I didn't say it, doesn't verbally say it, obviously, but he's like, I'm going to help you. Let's do this. You can get to this duel.
He holds out his hand and says the words, I need you to get to the top of those steps.
He doesn't want a cheap win. He respects John too much for that. He's not taking a cheap, like, count-out victory. Are you kidding me?
Of course.
So we get this pairing, we get this team up of two equally skilled John Wick-esque characters going up the staircase, fighting these guys, And every time they show them working in concert with each other, where John like lets him know, hey, there are guys over there or whatnot, and then Kane is covering for John as well. Yeah, that was fantastic. That was fun. Him like calling out where they are, like clockwise, like it's like, hey, 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, whatever. That was great. Like them working together in tandem like that was fantastic.
So the other thing that happens in this scene, they get all the way back up to the top, more or less, and then bearded guy's still there, causing problems. John falls down a few flights of stairs, and it seems...
Before you talk about this, we have to go back and talk about something that happens...
Right, I was going to bring it up.
In the abandoned building. So there's a moment where bearded guy, the henchman, is going to shoot Tracker's dog, Nobody's dog.
Tracker and John got into an extended fight scene because Tracker finally got the amount of money from Marquis that he wanted. He got $40 million is now the bounty. This is where it was finally marked up at high. And so now that he's able to get that amount, he's finally going to kill John.
This is after the big top-down sequence, but it's in the same building. And bearded henchman is going to shoot the dog. And John has a moment where he's actually won the fight. He's got a gun on nobody, and he can take the shot. He can win. But he sees that bearded henchman is going to hurt nobody's dog. And John makes the choice. And this is what's beautiful about this is that it's so well set up. This entire franchise started with him getting revenge for his puppy that got killed. So him making this choice to save the dog rather than like kill the guy that's trying to kill him. Obviously, this is the thing that's going to convince nobody to ultimately side with John and not want to kill him, which he does. You know, he ends up helping them out with bearded guy at the top of the stairs, and it's his dog ends up biting his nuts, you know, in revenge because he was going to kill the dog. So it's just desserts, all that.
I do like how, as far as I can tell, this dog only knows 2 commands. The first is kill, where the dog goes for the chest, and then the second is nuts, where he goes for the nuts.
Hey, dogs aren't that smart. You can only train them to do a few things. It's straightforward enough. But the idea that this was enough to get his respect, I suppose. So
then fast forward to this scene on the stairs.
Yeah.
And, you know, bearded guy's knocked him down a few flights again. He's got John on the ropes. And then the dog comes out and starts attacking him. And Tracker joins in on the fight. And together they take out the bearded guy. Along with, I think Kane was there as well, because he managed to do the thing where he takes a pencil, which we saw him pocket from a cafe earlier, and shoves it into the guy's hand.
Oh, well, actually, that reminds me. The first blow against Killa earlier on was John just like throwing a playing card at his neck and slitting part of his throat.
That was great.
I enjoyed that. Yeah, it was great. Yep. So he's made it. He's gotten to the top of the stairs.
Do want to put in, you said that there was a laugh, which we'll get to in a second. My theater laughed as the bearded guy was put down finally, because the dog pissed on the guy's face just for that extra little insult to injury. Yeah,
that was okay. The laugh that got me though is, so they actually get up to these steps, they're at the church, and it's like, okay, the duel can begin, sunrise, so it's gorgeous, you know, there's the city's behind them, they're up top, you know, looking over the city.
I mean, it is literally golden hour, it's just the other one.
So they're getting ready to take off their jackets, so no bulletproof, you know, jackets on for this, obviously. Old school pistols, 30 paces, all the rest of it. And they're seconds, so Winston goes up and gives the first bullet to John, and then likewise Marquis goes up to Kane, and he's like, "Remember your daughter, Mark." So he's trying to just threaten him one last time to motivate him, and without skipping a beat, Kane just goes "F off." Like, I think that's easily the best laugh in the whole movie.
Oh yeah, he just like barks it at him. He's like, "Get out of here!"
Yeah,
I don't want to deal with you.
He yells just "F off" at him. And Marquis is legitimately stunned and doesn't know what to do. He's like, "Oh, okay, I guess I'll just go." What's he going to do? Pick a fight right now when this guy's like fighting for him in this duel?
He just turns to the Harbinger. He said a mean thing.
So we get this duel, and we get, you know, the first shots, and they both shoot each other basically in the shoulders, and you know, and a second time, and each time they come closer. That's the rules. If you're both alive after the first shot, then you walk forward 10 paces. And we keep doing that until one of you's dead.
And I don't think that any actor besides Clancy Brown could sell the tension of having these people walk closer together.
So this is the thing, right? Obviously, I actually called what John's little trick was.
Same.
Yeah, I just kind of got it in the moment, like what he was doing. But effectively, what happens is after the third shot, I think it is. John actually, you know, gets hit in the side, like his stomach, sort of the side of his stomach. He goes down.
It seems pretty mortal woundy, sort of.
He goes down, and right at this moment, Marquis chimes in. "Oh no, you know what? I'm going to sub in here. I'm going to take the coup de grace. I'm going to take the kill shot when John's down." Like, so, oh my god, you're such a weasel. You're such a slimy piece of shit.
Yep.
You're going to take the kill shot when he's already wounded. For the satisfaction of doing it, like just like any other 1% or rich prick. And he grabs the gun.
Kane makes sure that he is now free of service.
Yeah, he's like, okay, I did my part, so my daughter's free, I'm free, we're safe, And
Yep.
Marquis like, yeah, you did your thing. Yeah, give me the gun. I want to go kill John Wick. And he goes to kill John Wick, and Winston just like he's pointing the gun at him, and Winston just says, "You arrogant prick." And I called this. He's like, John never fired in that round, and John just shoots the prick in the head, and it is
beautiful,
immensely satisfying.
My favorite thing though is that they made sure to do it rule of threes, where at the very beginning of the movie, talking to Winston and Sharon, the Marquis goes on this long thing about how there are consequences to his actions. And then during the scene where Winston is talking to the Marquis to get the duel going, they once again bring up the idea of consequences to their actions. So at this very last shot here, John pulls the trigger, and the last thing he says to the Marquis is consequences, and just shoots him in the head.
Yeah, it's satisfying. Is it more satisfying than the killing the bad guy at the end of 2? I'm not sure. They're both.
They're both
smug
They're
pricks.
both great, but here's the thing: they get the exact opposite emotions off. Where in 2, immediately Winston follows up with "What have you done?" It is setting up the events for basically the next 2 movies. It is this sense of relief that he did it, but dread at the same time. Whereas in this one, it's relief that he did it and the satisfaction that it's done.
Oh, it's fair.
It's over. It
was a fair kill, and then it's like, okay, like John Wick's free because Kane held up his end of the bargain. Him and his daughter are free. All the good characters we like have got, and this is the thing. Nobody just sits on a bench and watches this, which is why I'm saying he could. He could just be gone. Like, there's no reason for the character to be in this movie.
Yeah.
Because it's not even like we already have this mutual respect between John and Kane, so having this other character that kind of John earns respect with just kind of feels a little redundant to me.
Yeah, it does. Again, I think that it probably would have been a lot bigger of a thing had it been split into 4 or 5 and he just had a movie to himself. But in this context, yeah, once we had the scene of him managing to say, nah, John's an all right guy, and then save John's life, he could have left and it would have been the exact same story.
Yeah. So, we have John saying, "Take me home, Winston." He's like, "Yeah, of course I will." And he sits down and he thinks of his wife. We see the wife again, and I kind of like that it brought it back round to him thinking about her, and that's what kind of made the ending work to me. It was like, okay, this was about because there was a point in the movie where I was thinking, okay, we've switched to him just getting his freedom again, but I'm like, why does he care about that so much? What's the big deal about the freedom? And it was kind of the ending here where he's thinking about his wife, where I'm like, I was thinking about the last movie and like dying a free man, and I'm like, okay, I kind of get it. He wanted to go out free as the husband, and that again ties into the tombstone and what he wants written on it.
Yep.
So like, okay, I get all that. That's great. And we get a scene with the Bowery King and Winston at his grave.
Yeah, because he just collapses on the stairs.
Yeah, he has this big cinematic, death moment. However, couple things that are worth mentioning here.
All right, let's hear them.
So one thing's in universe, one thing's a meta thing. The meta thing, I'll get out of the way. They redid this ending. And apparently in the original ending, it kind of revealed that he was alive. The original ending, like I think he was even watching them at the cemetery or something like that. Like,
didn't I see that in a Marvel movie? Wasn't that it?
I think like so I saw some people talk about how because his dog's there, his dog that he got at the end of the first movie that's been kind of around here or there.
Was he?
Yeah.
Because you can look back in this review like an hour ago. You could see a light bulb go off in my head of like, where the hell was that dog?
He's at the ending.
Okay.
But he like turns and looks at something, and I think maybe in the original edit of the ending, maybe that was him seeing John Wick standing somewhere. So the fact that the ending was a little different and they changed it based on test audiences is interesting, especially if they're planning and having more. But here's the in-universe thing that I think is a bit juicier.
All right.
This was pointed out. I didn't think of this, but it was pointed out to me.
You could have claimed it. I wouldn't have known.
So, start of the last movie, right? So the second movie ended with him like, oh shit, excommunicado, in an hour, everyone's after you, and you're not allowed to get help. Just before that hour's up, he goes to a doctor, and the doctor's trying to patch him up in like the 5 minutes he's got left or whatever. After that, he's like, look, John, they're not going to believe me. You're going to have to make it look like you forced me. You're going to have to shoot me. The doctor tells him to shoot him in 2 places that will not kill him. Those 2 places are exactly the same places John Wick gets shot at in this duel at the end of the movie.
That is pretty good.
That, honestly, that makes me okay with it not being death, just because that's actually genius.
So, okay, running with that, though, it's, you know, he's not dead. We'll say that pretty clear. Why would he fake his death at this point? What is the benefit to that?
That is a good question. That is something that would only be explained. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think this still works as an ending if like they never if they never make another one and it's just like, oh, that's him, he's really dead. I think it works. It's fine. If they want to make a 5th one, there's still a table to kill. Like there's still something technically for him to go do. So I don't know. I mean, obviously, like it probably sounded like I was a lot more negative than it feels like I am, because I was critiquing a lot of the first 2/3 of the movie, because I do think there's some messy elements. I do think it's a bit overstuffed. I do think you could cut out the entire character of nobody. I think even the side quest with Killa like could have been changed drastically, and it felt a little bit like a diversion to an extent. But once it gets to that last 45 minutes, though, if you just like condense the first 2/3 down into a more like compact, more streamlined movie, like it might be my favorite one. As it is, because the pacing's a lot more all over the place, I have to say 2's still the better overall movie, but the last 45 minutes, give or take, of this one is probably the best action sequences of the entire franchise, which is impressive given what's already came before.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, there is, like you said, there's no reason that this movie needed to be 2 hours and 45 minutes.
No, not at all.
I would say you probably could have gotten away with trimming this down to, I'd say 2:15 would probably be the length that I would look for, and that would basically be just cutting down Osaka a little bit and trimming the fat on Killa. That's all that would really need to be taken out to make that happen. But yeah, no, those last 45 minutes, because that's just smart filmmaking. The thing that you're going to walk out of the theater with, the thing that's the most recent thing, needs to be the biggest thing. It needs to be the thing that's going to stick with you.
And that's the thing. Like, the last 45 minutes of most movies would be probably about half or almost half the movie. You know, if it's a 2-hour movie, if you come out going, the last 45 minutes are absolutely insane, it's like, oh, that's like almost half the damn thing. Here, it's a little bit weirder because it's like almost 2 hours before you get to that last 45 minutes.
You watch a movie, and then you get the season finale.
Yes.
Where it's, oh, hey, look at that.
So I think there are some pacing issues that you can point to with that, and there are some things that I didn't like. Nothing that I dislike. Well, I think Killa's the worst character in the whole franchise, but I don't think I dislike that part, because there's still stuff I liked in those sequences. There's still like the lighting, the way Kane was portrayed, moments like that I still liked. So I still hated the desert stuff in 3 the most.
Yeah, no, that's still awful. I guess if I'm thinking about it now, if you just cut out the scenes, and by cut out I mean separate, the scenes introducing Kane and intersplice them properly, you could just skip over everything right up until, like, everything that was in Osaka could just be taken out entirely.
Yeah, you could go from introducing Kane, and then the next time you see him is him sitting in the church with John Wick.
Yeah, or even, I mean, obviously the Killa scene would technically be in the middle of that, but restructure that so it's not as dumb.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. Yeah, you could.
I think I'd be okay with the Killa scene more if it were skipping the poker scene. If like he dealt out the cards and then we just skipped the whole poker scene and went straight into the fight scene, I think I'd be more okay with it.
Yeah, I think ultimately what we're saying here is that the movie could be streamlined. It definitely could have been whittled down, and it's not necessarily a problem with having a long movie if it feels like the material's there for it. I don't necessarily think it was in this case. It felt a little bit like I say, it felt like the hodgepodge of like 2 different movies coming together. But there is a post-credit scene.
Yes, which I mean, I'll just straight up say, I kind of regret staying for. I had stuff to do, and it didn't feel like it was that critical.
Yeah, also, like, so it's basically Kane's about to go and see his daughter and maybe actually introduce himself and give her flowers and stuff. And as he's walking up, we see Mia's there waiting to, like, assassinate him. And it cuts to black before, the strike happens, so you don't really know for sure what goes down. It's interesting because it does feel like that as a tease for something in the future. It does tie into the idea of consequences, of course, but, maybe the taking down the table is going to be more of an ensemble. Maybe it's going to be Kane plus Mia, because maybe like he'll convince her that he was forced and this is why he was forced. Or,
I mean, even then, I think that would have been apparent during that. All this seemed like to me was the exact same scene plays out, smash cut to black, and then I was expecting to see Mia will return.
Yeah. So if they do come back to these characters at some point, and they very well might, whether that's in a John Wick 5, whether that's in a Kane or Mia
I mean, it might very well be in Ballerina for all we know.
It could be. All these characters that were set up here could end up being in Ballerina, yeah. So we'll see. And I know they're shooting that right now. That's coming out next year, Ballerina.
Okay.
Cool. They're shooting that, I think, in Czechoslovakia right now. So we'll see. But
keeping that globe-trotting thing going.
Maybe that's just where it's set, though.
I mean, possibly.
Yeah, I don't know if they're going to be jumping around from place to place, but yeah, it's honestly, I was really satisfied as far as an action movie goes. Like, the last 45 minutes absolutely makes the entire thing utterly worth it. But there are critiques, there are things to sort of pull apart and talk about, but the action that lasts like 45 minutes is so goddamn good that it does shoot to second place in the franchise.
I mean, I'm on the same boat with you. I would love to go back and actually rewatch the first John Wick now. Because from our time scales, it has been about like a month or two since we watched it. I want to see how like grounded it feels, in comparison, because obviously this series, while it has been in the same world, it has spiraled out on many different things.
It's gotten bigger. It's got more outlandish for sure.
I wonder if I went back to it now, would I even recognize it as the same series? Because I mean, you go back to that first movie, it's about a dog and a car, and then you get to this point, there's no dog, there's no car. It's completely separate.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about earlier, about how sometimes it feels like, is this even the same world as that we were in that first one? Because it's gotten so much bigger that it just doesn't feel like it is the same world anymore. But that's something a lot of franchises kind of face as they get bigger, as things go on.
We have and will run into that multiple times on this show. So
yeah, but absolutely worth seeing. It's very good, and if you like action movies, it's an easy recommendation. Just with a few caveats, I would say.
Yeah.
So
for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was saying, I know this is not technically something. If you're going to go see it in theaters, I'd say your best place to take like a bathroom break, if you need one, is during the Fat Man scene. I think that's like, if you really want to see the action, then stay until just after that. But you can take a break there. You don't need to.
Honestly, yeah, when John's going to talk to like his, quote unquote family that he's trying to get back into, all the scenes with them, like, I could have cut all those. Like, those were just kind of fluffy to me.
Because it was a side quest. You were hit it dead on the head with that. So
yeah, you take out that rule that he has to be in a family, and all of a sudden you can just go straight to building to the thing, and you can cut out like 30 minutes of the movie. And well, some of the fight in the water was all right. None of it compared to what came later. Like, no, I would not have felt. If anything, I would have been happier with because it was brisker and more tighter. But I would not have felt shortchanged if those last 45 minutes of action were the only action we got in the whole movie.
I think the biggest issue would be that, at the point where they are at Sharon's grave, that's, what would you say, an hour into the movie? Hour and 20 maybe?
I don't know, it's hard to tell.
Yeah.
It's really hard to tell, to be honest, but yeah.
Roughly an hour 20 into the movie. To then go from that to he just says, hey, I'm challenging you to a duel. And then we get the whole duel setting up scene not more than 10 minutes later. That feels like it would be out of place because that feels like it's, I don't know. I guess if you cut out the Fat Man scene, what really is the second act anymore?
The second act's just, you can just turn it into, I mean, because there's a whole thing, we never even mentioned the Bowery King shows up for a cameo in Paris with a suit for John. Like, you can simply just set it up as, like, you know, even just getting to the stage where you can make the challenge is maybe a bit of a thing, but yeah, I could, yeah.
What if I know this is complete just rearranging the parts of the movie. Cut the Fat Man scene, set the Sharon's grave and like the idea of the duel at the beginning, but instead of him going back to his old family and becoming part of that, he goes to the Japanese guy and joins that family instead, and therefore you get the whole Osaka scene and a reason to be there.
Okay, yeah, that's not bad. That's not bad. Yeah. So a bit bloated, but goddamn, that action in the last chunk is so good. Like, it's so good. Like, I can't praise it enough. So yeah, I guess it's time to rate the movie. David, what are you rating John Wick Chapter 4?
All right. So, I mean, I've already made it clear where it stands amongst the other movies. The question is, how do I somehow sandwich it in between an 8 and an 8.5? Which, obviously, I just have to put it on one or the other. Yep. I think I'm going to give it the lower and give it the 8 rather than the 8.5. Still fantastic. Still great. Puts it on the level of the first movie. But, like we said, there are some complaints to have in terms of pacing, in terms of the third movie going into this movie felt like a non sequitur, like nothing really flowed, and they just kind of had to scramble to rearrange the pieces into a way that allowed for the plot of this movie to happen. But once you get past, pretty much once you get to the point where John makes it back to New York, that's where it starts feeling like a solid movie throughout.
Yeah.
Barring one side quest. And I did not nearly dislike the character of Nobody as much as you. I thought he was a good addition to have this trio of fighters.
I admit part of this is a little bit of a personal thing because I just already kind of don't like the actor because of a character he played on something else. But I do legitimately think that you could cut the character out of the movie and it probably wouldn't really change. You wouldn't even have to redo much other things to make it work. You would just you just wouldn't have him.
I'm not saying he's not crucial to the plot. I don't think he is crucial to the plot we were provided, but I do think that having this trio of people makes it more unique because there's always been a John-esque character since like the second movie. There's always been one who is able to fight closer on John's level. I like this trio of one's doing it for money, one's doing it for family, and then John's doing it just because he doesn't know anything else at this point.
Yeah, and on that thing you said there about the start of this movie is disjointed with the last one because it feels like it just wants to quickly erase everything that the last one set up. It has no interest in being the movie the last one actually set it out to be. The opposite of that, of course, is the start of 3, which did just deliver on what the end of 2 said. Hey, this is what the next one is. And 3, for at least a large portion of it, was fulfilling that promise. But for whatever reason, and some of it might have been like because they heard criticisms, maybe they realized they'd made some missteps, and we criticized some of the things that 3 did at the end. Maybe that's why. Maybe it's just that simple. But yeah. But anyway, so you went with an 8, you said?
I went with an 8. Yep. So you got more of a breadth. You gave the first movie a 7, but the second movie an 8. So you got a whole 1.5 there to work with.
Yeah, I mean, the easy option is to just go with 7.5 and call it down the middle. Like, I'm just trying to decide if the action in that last chunk is so good that it just elevates it enough to be an 8 as well.
I mean, with how you've been singing its praise, just hear the opening drums from Painted Black playing in your head as he walks down the street. Yeah,
but I've also had a lot of things to critique as well. It's not
you
have. There's been a lot of critiquing of the movie as a whole. But does all that just get thrown out the window because the last 45 minutes is so good?
Their choices have consequences, Pete.
I'm going to go with 8 as well. I
Okay.
think 7.5 just feels too low given how special some of it feels, even though it is far more uneven than 2. So,
Okay.
yep.
And I think
that's my stance.
I think on our secondary scale, makes the cut.
It makes the
clearly.
cut. Yeah, it
Makes the cut.
Yeah. So there you go. Nice and straightforward. That wraps up John Wick season. Now, if you're curious what happens when a new one comes out or when Ballerina comes out, we will eventually, when there's new entries of movies for franchises that we've already done, we will do one-off episodes of just doing the new movie since we've already done the rest of them. So, don't worry. Ballerina and things like that will get reviewed.
We don't have to wait for 4 of them to come out to revisit it again.
No, not at all. That's part of the fun. So, so coming up next, I mentioned at the start, but we're going to a video game adaptation season. This is, of course, because the Super Mario Brothers animated movie's coming out, so you can expect that. But we'll be starting off with Street Fighter from 1993 is what next week's episode is going to be, so look forward to that.
Oh boy.
So this has been John Wick Chapter 4. You can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. Of course, we do bonus episodes every month. 2 types of bonus episodes. There's one at the $3 tier, which is an episode that kind of ties into whatever the theme is. So at the start of this season, we did Peppermint, because it was a revenge action movie. To tie in with John Wick. And then we also have Extra Reels, which is like a So Bad It's Good movie review. Well, hopefully anyway. We've not been let down so far, but yes, we did Gone with the Pope for... No, that's next month.
No, that's next month.
Yeah.
But Dangerous Men was this
Dangerous Men for this month. Well, Gone with the Pope's next month, so if you want to hear our thoughts on that, that's coming up. So, yeah, go and get some bonuses. There's obviously bonuses for the other movie shows we have on there as well, from Streams After Midnight and the Atomic Cinema Experiment. But yeah, check out Patreon, keep all the content coming, and support the show. You can, of course, also like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications. You can do all those things for free, and that helps us out too. So thank you very much. But that is the show. Thank you very much for joining us. We always appreciate it. Keep watching movies, and I really hope that John Wick 5 starts with someone maybe killing Winston, maybe blowing up the Continental again, whatever it is. Someone does something bad to Winston and related characters, and then it just cuts to the grave, and John Wick's hand rises out of the grave like a zombie, like Jason Voorhees coming to life. He digs his way out of the grave. He's covered in dirt. There's dirt hanging from his hair, and he just says, "Yeah, I'm thinking I'm back."